Hi, everyone. It's Tessa.
And Joe.
From the Unveiling Paradise podcast.
Tessa, summer is almost here, and so many of our listeners are about to have their epic destination wedding.
And we are so excited for you guys.
Before the big day, guys, we want you to make sure you listen to these 3 episodes.
Episode 62, Deep Diving Your Wedding Ceremony.
Episode 53, Questions Your Wedding Guests Will Ask.
And episode 31, the final countdown to your wedding day.
And if you're planning your wedding here in Hawaii, hit us up and ask us about our Unveiling Paradise podcast promo.
Happy planning.
Welcome everyone to our show today. Good morning, Tessa. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you today?
I am very excited. I'm jazzed.
I'm super jazzed too.
All right. Today's topic is something that we talk about as like a photographer, we talk about all the time, and that is Photoshop. Okay. So can you make me look skinnier or can, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we want to talk about today, right? It's that post-production editing of the photos to, again, like what is reasonable? What do I want? What do I expect myself to look like in my wedding photos?
I think when it comes to like that conversation you have when you're looking at photographers and you're, thinking about booking a photographer, that's a question that you always want to be asking. What can I expect from my photos? Are you going to remove pimples from them? Do you do any of that type of work? What we've done today is we've brought in a very special guest to our show, Rachel Robertson of Rachel Robertson Photography. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, guys.
All right, so let's get into this. Before we start our show, give our listeners a little bit of a background about Rachel Robertson Photography, and, kind of how did you get started?
A little background on myself. I took my first darkroom class when I was in middle school. Then I did yearbook and newspaper all through high school.
Yes.
I went to college for photography. I'm one of the rare ones who actually have a degree in photography. After college, I moved to New Mexico, worked at a photography workshop for a few years before moving to Hawaii in 2004. And that's when I started shooting weddings.
Amazing.
I love it. We have been working together for over 10 years, so she has been consistently getting photos of me and truly making me feel really good about myself. So welcome. I'm super happy to have you here today, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
One thing that I really, really love about you, Rachel, is the fact that, because we've worked together for so long, we have a really good open line of communication. So during our photo sessions, and sometimes, guys, it's awkward because she'll be like, move your head, turn your chin. She's like, it's going to feel weird, but trust me. And I do. So again, however she wants me to pose, I will do. But post-production, right, it's that again, communication, that ability to talk to you about, like, these are the photos that I really like. Can you make me look a little more aligned with what I imagine I look like?
And I appreciate that you take all my suggestions and you trust me in the moment, and then you also trust me after the fact to kind of get those photos to where you want them to be.
For sure. I am an obedient client.
All right, let's get into our show today. We are talking all things Photoshop, so welcome, everybody.
Let's get started. Welcome to Unveiling Paradise, your go-to destination wedding podcast. I'm Tessa, wedding planner and owner of Fred & Kate Events.
And I'm Joe, wedding and adventure photographer of Joseph Esser Photography. We are based in Hawaii, one of the biggest, most popular locations for destination weddings.
We want to share our real-life experiences with you, give you insight from a professional's perspective, and still make sure you're having fun in the process.
We're huge believers in the fact that planning a destination wedding can be one of the most amazing experiences, and we want to bring you along.
We're so excited to talk with you about weddings, Hawaii, and everything else under the sun.
So pack your bags and let's get started. All right, let's get started. So before we take a deep dive into this conversation today with Rachel, I want to just start the conversation by saying there are really 2 parts to wedding photography. There is the taking of the photos and then what you do with those photos after you import them into your computer. Now, just to start with that first part, the taking of the photos. So in order to look your best, photographers like myself and Rachel, there's a lot we can do to kind of ever avoid even needing to Photoshop somebody, right? So when you pose somebody, you always want to know, like, is this the person's best angles? Does this pose make them look thinner or like, does this pose make them look more broad and like unflattering, and that sort of thing. That's the first part of having great photos, is actually taking the photos. And I think for most photographers, you don't want to have to Photoshop if you don't have to. So actually talking about capturing images, let's start here and then let's move into actually talking about Photoshop.
Okay, so the other day, Joe and I went to an event, and it's funny, we were standing there taking a group photo, and he was like, hey, turn your body slightly. And I think, again, right, it's that pre-prep for your photos, right? How does your photographer work with you to make sure that you are getting your best angles, that you're looking the best, to make sure that they don't have to do a lot of Photoshop after? You know, we brought on Rachel. I'm sure you have a ton of really good tips also that can kind of help people prepare themselves before you have to get to the adjusting and the Photoshopping after the fact, right?
Yeah, so we always want to make you look your best in the moment so that we don't have to get into the Photoshop of it later. Constantly doing things like micro adjusting poses, making sure you have the best lighting on you, working with your angles. I'll always ask a client if they have a best side because I want to showcase that instead of just kind of never knowing those things. I actually photographed an entire engagement session once, and afterwards, the client said to me, oh, I hate my profile. And I'm thinking, how many profile photos did I actually take? Probably a ton, but I didn't know that she hated her profile. So things like that are very helpful to tell your photographer ahead of time because I would never assume someone hated their profile.
And you're always good at telling me, you know, like when we do photos, she's like, stretch your neck out. She's like, it feels awkward. She's like, it's going to look a lot better. So again, right, it's just having your photographer know what you're self-conscious about or what you like or don't like, it sets everybody up for success.
Yes. And also it's really important as a photographer to just keep a close eye on things like your makeup, your hair, you know, things like that. It's during the whole long wedding day. Sometimes your hair gets messy. Sometimes the curls get flat. Sometimes, you know, eyelashes fall off. So we have to be paying attention to those little details because it's crazy to think that you're going to Photoshop all of those photos later if somebody's eyelashes fall off.
I think there's a lot to actually talk about. Besides just posing and different angles, there's a lot of different things that go into looking your best for, obviously, your photos, right? So your hair and makeup, we talked about that a little bit. But also, I think that one of the biggest things that I notice is, does the dress fit right? Is this a flattering dress? Is it, you know, like we had a wedding recently where the bride's dress was just way too tight. And like, it was sort of showing everything that the bride didn't really want to show. You know what I mean?
On the flip side, I've done a wedding where the bride's dress was way too big. She lost a lot of weight, and just the way it was a strapless dress. And so the photographer had to Photoshop every single photo because it was just popping out.
And it's also things like, is your bra strap showing? Is your underwear showing? Like all those things, those are things that you can avoid in advance, right?
What I see a lot, you know, when I'm walking around with the bride and the bridesmaid, it's those dress straps on under their arms. They're always popping out, you know, so like I will cut them off. A lot of times though, for some reason, they don't want me to. They want to keep it on to hang their dress again. But I'm like, it's in every photo. Cut it off. So I think that's a huge one, right? Because if not, I'm guessing that, you know, Rach and Joe, you guys are probably having to edit, Photoshop those out.
Well, there's always something in a bride, you know, if you're kind of adjusting things during, especially wedding party photos, there's always, almost every single time there's a bridesmaid, they'll say, just Photoshop it. I hear it every wedding.
Yeah.
And I think that will kind of lead us to our next point, right? Is like, what is okay to ask and what's not? So one thing that I want to talk about with you today, Rachel, is just the fact that obviously Photoshop is a big deal. For me personally, like I know that I like my photos to look filtered. I want to look skinny. But it is also understanding that this is a wedding, right? Your wedding is never, it's not a photo shoot, right? It's the ups, the downs. It's everything that happens, all of the emotion. And the emotions on a wedding day are not always perfect. So it's just kind of understanding that with a photographer, when they're shooting that whole day, you're not necessarily trying to hit perfection. And I think that's what I want to acknowledge also before we start is what are realistic expectations? Like what makes sense to ask your photographer to Photoshop? And what are things that are okay to just kind of let them be imperfect?
I totally agree with you. I think the flaws of a wedding, like all the emotion, the rawness, you don't want to lose that. Like, and I think what you're kind of alluding to is like, if every single photo is perfected, that's not really your wedding day. This is crazy, but I've had a bride who asked me to Photoshop a tear on the groom's face while like she was walking down the aisle. That didn't happen, you know, and I think that there is this balancing act between making people look their best, but also not stealing that reality from the photo. and changing something, manipulating something so much that it's no longer actually real.
I think the important things to keep are the emotions, the kind of love that is shown between the couple. I would never try to kind of manipulate that part of a wedding. What I do think, you can fix is just making everyone look their best. At the end of the day, the couples are going to have these photos hanging on their walls. And do they want to see all those imperfections? No, they want to just see the love and the emotion and the ups and downs of their wedding, but also in the best light.
I think what's really funny though is if you think about a wedding day, as you get towards the end of the night, things start to get a little more real, right? Everyone's drinking. Maybe some people are a little flushed. Maybe some people are a little sweaty. I think part of that is fine. Like, that's the emotions, right? At the end of the day, the couple is not going to look as fresh as they did in the beginning, but it's kind of that we made it. Everyone's a little partied out, but I feel like those pictures are equally as fun because they are imperfect than your immediately after your wedding first kiss.
So you're saying, like, if you have these like party pictures and the groomsmen are super drunk, don't make them look sober.
Yeah, I mean, make me look sober, but like everybody else.
And sweaty, but they're in the emotion. They're having fun.
Yeah,
they're sweating.
they're dancing. You're going to be
Yeah.
sweaty. You're going to get a little crazy. And I think those, for me, those are okay.
No one's trying to ask.
Well, let's
Photoshop somebody sober.
well, let's jump into this. What are people asking then? Like when you are meeting with your client before the shoot, or when you're reviewing pictures with your couples, like what are some things that are common to ask your photographer to do?
I would say most people are asking for either weight or age. So they, have a few extra wrinkles, they have a few extra pounds that they're self-conscious about, and they want to make sure that that is not, what you focus on when you see their pictures. Tessa and I had a client beautiful woman.
Stunning.
Who, bought this dress, very tight, very fitted, lace, gorgeous dress. And she tried to lose weight to kind of fit into the dress, but she just wasn't able to do it. So right before the wedding, Tessa called me and said, she didn't lose the weight. It's a little bit tight, so we're going to need you to Photoshop it. So, we ended up choosing 100 of her wedding photos, and I edited all of those for her.
And you did such a great job, but I remember she was so self-conscious because she really, really tried, and she just couldn't. And at that point, the dress was purchased. It was too late to do anything about it. She wasn't comfortable in her photos no matter what we did. And so it just kind of came to that point where Photoshop was the only thing that really made her feel good about herself at the end.
All right, so this is actually, I really want to ask you this question. And I think this is, I'm gonna load this question before I even ask it. But I think it's awkward. I think it could be considered demeaning to someone to manipulate their body without them asking you to do that. But if you don't, right, then they're going to say, well, why didn't you Photoshop me? And so I think let's jump into this question. Like, when you are making people slim down, or slimming people's arms, or slimming people's waist, should you have that conversation with your photographer before you're actually editing those photos, instead of assuming that your photographer is going to do that for you?
So just for example, it depends on the photographer's contract. So for example, in my contract, I have a certain amount of photos that I touch up a little bit more. So like the actual photoshopping, most of them are just kind of a basic, and then they can ask for more later if they want to. But in those photos, if they have not asked me to do anything, I do a pretty minimal photoshopping. I'll do a little bit of skin smoothing, of course, take out pimples, bruises, things like that. But I'm not doing anything major. I'm not taking 10 pounds off of them without their permission or their asking. I'm just doing a very slight touch up for them. So I'm just making them enhanced, not any really different. But if they, for example, if their arm is at an unflattering angle, if they're kind of pressing it up against them and it's looking a little wider than it does in real life, I'll fix that just a little bit. Nothing to where they wouldn't be recognizable. Unfortunately, our cameras are getting more and more high definition, so it really does show every little pore. And, I don't necessarily think it's always flattering, but without asking me, I won't just assume that somebody wants to be smaller.
Is it okay to have that conversation with your photographer before the wedding or after the wedding about for all of our listeners, is this something that you would feel comfortable talking to your photographer about?
Well, I've had both. I've had, some people kind of know, like the client that Tessa and I had together, that she was not quite at the weight that she wanted to be to fit into her dress. And she knew that it was going to require a little bit of photoshopping to get her there. And then some people get their pictures back and they say, oh, you know, people are just naturally kind of critical of themselves, I think. And it's natural to say, okay, you know, I'd like a little bit of something to kind of help with these. So I think you can have it either before or after.
But I think the point is either way, having that conversation with your photographer is important. I heard both of you today say that you've had kind of those side comments, right? Like, make me look skinnier, right? But like, that's not an ask. Like, you're casually kind of laughing about it at the wedding. Like, that is not a formal ask to your photographer, make me look skinnier, slim my waist, adjust my double chin, you know? So I think it's important that if you want that slimming or you want that Photoshop, that you do have a very open and honest conversation with your photographer.
Yes, and those kinds of touch-ups take hours and hours and hours. So definitely don't expect, you know, to make a comment, please make me skinnier, and expect them to touch up hundreds of photos without you really sitting down and talking about the time and the additional cost that it might have after the wedding.
Just use your skinny lens.
Yeah, use your skinny lens, Rachel.
Well, all my lenses are skinny lenses.
There's some ways to do that. And I'm just going to throw in my little tip. When you're first meeting with a client, I think it's easy to just say, is there anything that you're insecure about that you want me to be aware of? And I think a lot of times when we ask that, they'll say, I don't like this side, or I'm trying to lose a little bit of weight. You know, is this something that we can address during the photos or afterwards? And I think that goes a long ways. As a photographer, though, you don't want to be caught completely off guard on the day of the photo shoot, where it's like, okay, I have all of these expectations. Are they realistic or are they not? You know, and I think that's something that we always want to talk about. I had this one client, this was years and years ago. So I walk into the hotel room and it's the bride and bridesmaid and everyone. And the bride says, hey, I have this thing I want you to Photoshop. And I'm like, okay, no problem. What is it? And she smiles and she has like full on, you know, stainless steel braces, right? You know, and she's like, can you Photoshop my braces off of my teeth? And I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea. I don't know if I can actually do that. Like, I never.
Did you do it?
I've never been asked to do that before. So like, as every good professional photographer would do, I went on YouTube and I learned how to remove braces from someone's smile. So I did. I said, I can do maybe 5 or 10 pictures total. Each photo, though, you're truly recreating her teeth, and you're recreating that person's smile. It's crazy amount of work. Like, it took me, I think, an hour per image just to Photoshop.
Oh
I mean,
God.
can you imagine that?
That's crazy.
You know, and like, you know, so those are some of those things where it's like, is this realistic to ask your photographer or not? And I think we probably have tons of stories like this, you know, where it's like on the day or after the fact, they're like, can you do this? And there's some things that we can do, and there's some things that are really, truly beyond our means, I think. All right, we've talked about the body. We've talked about like looking your best.
That was awkward.
That was awkward. We've talked about, but time out, like, there's a lot more that we actually photograph for wedding photos, right? So a lot of times, and I know Rachel and I, we shoot at the beach all the time. There's always those things that are distracting, right? So we're always, when we shoot, I think it's, one, are we capturing an image in a way that is clean and there's nothing distracting in the background? And sometimes when you're in Waikiki Beach and there's 1,000 people and there's that one random dude in like a green Speedo, you know, right? Like, you
comes to every wedding at the Moana.
well, you shoot it in a way to know that you can turn them into water, right? You can easily remove them, make them into sand, and they're no longer this weird kind of, you know. So, okay, so what do you actually see, or what are you actually working on? Like, those little details that, you know, you can make what is a beautiful photo or what's a very awkward photo. Like, what are some of the things that you typically will do to enhance pictures that doesn't take away not being realistic anymore?
So when I am looking at a photo to kind of figure out what I want to do to it, I sort of just let my eye wander around the photo, and I find things that my eye lands on. And if they're not something that I want to be part of the photo, say a rock or a swimmer in the ocean in the background, things like that, I will take them out. So, and I kind of do that a few times to just let my eye wander around the photo and see, what is helping this photo and enhancing this photo, and what is detracting from this photo.
So what you shoot it in a way to know that you can turn them into water, right? You can easily remove them, make them into sand, and they're no longer this weird kind of, you know. So, okay, so what do you actually see, or what do you actually working on? Like, those little details that, you know, you can make what is a beautiful photo or what's a very awkward photo. Like, what are some of the things that you typically will do to make to enhance pictures that doesn't take away not being realistic anymore?
we live in Hawaii and the beaches get really busy at sunset. So if I have a couple that's going to run outside for photos at sunset, you have beautiful Diamond Head in the background, there's a lot of people on the beach. Like, is that something that you can take all those people out so it looks like they're on a private secluded beach in Waikiki?
I would focus more on, angling the couple so that they're in front of the water, but not necessarily showing all of the beach. So it's a question of, finding an empty spot where we can go that's pretty close to the location, and then just angling them. They might be right next to the water and you might just be shooting out towards the water, but it's pretty tough to take out hundreds of people. It can be done, but at the end of the day, it's not going to look realistic.
I agree with you. I think, and again, like we were talking about this, photography is about creating the image. So like what you're saying is like framing it in a way where you're not seeing everybody. And then also what you can potentially Photoshop. I always think though, and this is, I like to be sort of heavy-handed with that type of Photoshopping where I'm removing someone sitting in an inner tube if I can, if it looks natural, right? There's something to say in the same way that you see when you're sort of looking at the image. I sort of think of the same way where it's like, here's this couple, beautiful couple on the beach at sunset. They're in this moment, you're feeling that. And like when you see that thing that's out of place, the dude sitting in the pink flamingo floaty, right? All of a sudden that picture is no longer romantic. It's kind of awkward, right? And I think that's probably, there's just like sort of an awkward test that like photographers are doing. Does this look great? Or does this just look so out of place that we need to fix it? We need to change it.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those distracting elements that you would need to take out. Unless you are like, hey, can we borrow your pink flamingo floaty and just like throw the couple around it and make something else out of it?
Gosh, this is such a hard conversation to talk about because there's so many things that we actually do and are doing for photos. And I guess at the end of the day, it's like, is it clean? Is it authentic? Is it real? Right? So sometimes, again, like hair is blowing in the wind. Sometimes that's awesome. Sometimes it's super distracting.
So I see this a lot, like as a non-photographer, I don't know the fancy words that you guys are saying here, but what I see a lot is, people will like a certain photographer because of their style. The color, it's super bright or it's kind of like muted. Is it okay for someone to ask you to kind of change your style? So if they're like, hey, we really like this photographer's style of photos or their color, but we like you, like, can you edit it to look like that? Like, is that something normal or is that something that's okay to ask or is that kind of wrong?
So a lot of photographers have sort of their style that they have developed, and it includes the post-production. So how they sort of handle the photos after, the color, the cast, the tone that they have in their photos. And it's a specific style of editing. If you don't like that style of editing, you probably should find a photographer whose editing style you like because they are most comfortable in that style. A lot of photographers will take offense if you ask them to kind of edit in a different style. So a lot of photographers have spent, years and years kind of honing a certain style. And that style is sort of their signature. And they edit in a certain way to make the photos look that way. Whether it's like a color tone or a cast or a filter that they use, it just depends on the photographer. But if you're asking the photographer to totally change their style, it's probably not the right fit for you. You should find a photographer whose personality you love and also the end product that you already love so that they're not doing something they're not comfortable with after the fact.
And so to confirm, then you're saying, like, for example, a filter, right? Like, is it a lot of work to add a filter? Because I think a lot of my clients, right, like me, that just don't know photography, for them, again, they're like, can't they just slap a filter on all of these pictures and just change it?
They could, yes, absolutely. But it feels like it's disingenuous to the style that you have kind of spent years creating.
Sure, that makes sense.
And just to add on to that too, again, like sounding like a broken record here, a lot of it also happens when you're shooting those pictures. So if we want those really poppy, vibrant shots at sunset, we'll bring out a studio light. That's how you achieve those results. If you're a natural light photographer at sunset, you're not bringing out that lighting and your colors are going to be more muted. The sunset isn't going to have these real vibrant colors. If that's your aesthetic, a lot of that happens before you're actually getting into throwing filters and whatnot on.
And I think, that's something important to note, again, as the non-photographer in the room, is that I kind of believe that everything can be fixed post-production. So it's really interesting for me to hear you say that some things can't. I mean, obviously, I know that I can't look like Kim Kardashian. But in terms of the sunset, like, I feel like, why wouldn't you be able to change it? So I think it's a really important point to make that some things cannot be changed or adjusted post-production.
So Rachel, you have to tell us, okay, I know as a photographer, I've been asked to do some crazy things. What is your crazy Photoshop request that you've had? Like I'm sure you have you've got to have a handful of stories of just like ridiculous requests that you had to like address for your clients to make them happy.
So both of my craziest ones have to do with grooms.
Oh.
One groom.
Oh, all right.
I was in the getting ready room with the bride and she's so mad, just seething. And I was kind of like, okay, there's some tension here. What's going on? So she tells me the story of the night before the wedding. They all went out, bridesmaids, groomsmen. Like the groomsmen got into a bar fight at one of the Waikiki bars and the bouncers like jumped them or whatever, but gave the groom a giant black eye. So he had a black eye for every wedding photo. So a lot of angling, a lot of like, okay, this is now your good side. But yeah, I definitely had to Photoshop a lot of photos for that one.
Wow, that's crazy.
The other story is I did an engagement session. I do a lot of just like natural, kind of like walking photos, walking away, walking towards me type of thing. And the bride called me after and said, I really love this photo, except I think my groom has a wedgie. Can you Photoshop that out?
Oh,
Can you?
I did. I fully did. I was like, I don't know, but I'll try. I did it.
when you're editing, you have to zoom in on this. You're zooming in this buns.
I laughed the whole time.
Love it.
Oh my God.
That's great. Just to sort of recap, again, like if we want to talk about how to look your best in your wedding photos, first, all the things you can do beforehand. Choosing an outfit that fits. Removing all the tags so we don't have to Photoshop things out like that. Underwear. Make sure your undies aren't visible, right?
So awkward.
It is awkward. Your hair and makeup. First and foremost, making sure you're working with a professional hair and makeup artist. That's going to be, you shouldn't have to retouch so much if you have professional hair and makeup done. And again, informing your photographer of any of your own insecurities before you actually take those photos. We want you to embrace your flaws. You shouldn't have to think that like everything has to be perfect. We just want you to look your best.
At the end of the day, we can be really critical of ourselves, but we just want to be in our best light. We want to have photos on our wall that show us the emotion of the day and the beautiful moments of the day. And we don't want to have to focus on our imperfections.
Exactly. And I just kind of want to wrap up by just, talking about Rachel for a second. And when we talk about our imperfections and we talk about just kind of, having those photos that you want to put on your wall, the photos that you want to keep. Number one, having a good relationship with your photographer, having open communication to say, this is how I feel, or this is how I want to look based on just my insecurities, right? Working with a photographer that you really trust. And Rachel, to me, is that person, right? Where I trust that she understands what I like. She also handles, again, like we've done some very crazy windy shoots where I know she's going to take care of the hair, and also just understanding my angles, right? Being able to move me to make it work best. And also at the end of the day, really being able to kind of make me feel confident in the way I look. And I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess, tell us where we can find you, like share your socials, your website, like where can people find you?
So I'm at rachelrobertson.com and hashtag Rachel Robertson Photography on Instagram, Facebook, Rachel Robertson Photography.
Thanks again, Rachel, for being on our show. Right? I think what I love about you is you're the whole package. You understand how to pose people, how to shoot them to catch their best angles. But also you're super talented about, making your photos look so natural and real and realistic. And I hope everybody takes a look at her website. Check her out, follow her on Instagram. Make sure you guys are following our show and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Unveiling Paradise.
If you enjoy our show, please follow us and rate us on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It would really mean a lot.
And don't forget to also get on our mailing list and follow us on Instagram. Just do it already.
Until next time, this is Tessa.
And this is Joe.
And don't forget, your happily ever after
is just a plane ride away.